Now, what prominent scientists and climate scientists have arguments against your book and against you and the way you're relaying this information?
Michael Mann, for example, Naomi Oreskes, Alan Dessler. I would love to be on a stage with some of these scientists, okay?
What about on a podcast? One of the things that I understand this is going to be a very controversial podcast, and your book is controversial. I would like to get someone to come on opposite of you next, and either by themselves first and then you with them together, or depending upon what they would like. Maybe.
I would certainly be up for that, but let me tell you what you should do. Get her to write it down and then get the two of us on together and let's have a discussion.
Have you debated anyone about this?
So I have not debated anybody about this. Actually, I take it back. I debated this person, Richard Lindzen, in 2010. My feeling is that I won't debate the science. So the science is set. Earth. Temperature's warming. Humans are the cause. I'm happy to debate policy because I think policy needs to be debated. So if someone wants to debate energy policy with me,
why wouldn't you debate the science?
Because the science has already been debated in the scientific system.
I understand that, but to the average person that gets confused and doesn't know whether or not you're correct or Steve Koonin is correct,
yeah. So I think
a debate would be very beneficial.
I disagree with that entirely because
how so?
Because in a one-on-one debate, without the ability to fact check people, so let's
why
say,
couldn't you fact check them in real life?
In real time.
Yeah,
because
how
do I do that? He says, this paper says this. And I'm saying, do you want me to read the paper?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a debate that would take a week.
There is a flawed belief that I think a lot of academics and people in elite positions have, which is that the general public, the average American, let's say, is stupid and has a short attention span. And obviously, things like Twitter and TikTok provide some evidence for that, and in general, people want instant gratification. But that is ignoring one half of the picture, because there's also a huge market for long-form podcasts with deep intellectual discussion. There's a demand for intellectual debate, like the kind that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson have.
It's important to do something other than masturbate. You want to end this on masturbation?
Which involve extremely complicated philosophical discussions that the average person isn't going to be able to grasp right away.
I can't see how you can interpret the world of facts without an a priori interpretive structure. And this is an old philosophical claim. It's not unique to me. It's the claim of Kant, for example.
And yet, millions of people watch anyway. So I take a lot of issue with the cynical and arrogant idea that, well, scientists and intellectuals are capable of having discussions behind closed doors, but if it involves the general public, well, that could open the door for confusion and whatnot. I understand the idea that, for example, when talking about climate change, an audience that doesn't have a background in science isn't going to be able to follow along with all the terminology, and someone who's acting in bad faith could misuse that and sort of manipulate the conversation in such a way that seems like they're on the right track when they're really not. But the reality is if you had a debate on a Joe Rogan podcast, there's so many scientists and people who study science and have degrees in this field that do follow along, that basically create the parameters around the discussion, because if either Steve Koonin or Andrew Dessler said something that was not true, just straight up factually wrong, that the average person wouldn't be able to detect right away, there's tens of thousands of people who are scientists who would be listening to the conversation as well, who could fact check that after the fact. And that's almost a non-issue, because Dessler specifically says that Koonin's facts are actually correct, it's just that he's ignoring stuff. So I would like to hear a discussion between Koonin and Dessler so that I can evaluate, well, are either of these people ideologically motivated? Because Koonin, who worked for BP, could just be a shill for the oil companies, and Dessler could be ideologically motivated to use climate change as an excuse to invoke certain policies. I don't know. I'd like to evaluate the discussion that they have, and maybe not necessarily pay attention to all of the terminology they're using, but to determine, well, are either of these people acting in bad faith? Because one of the ways that you can evaluate who is correct on a controversial issue is when a conversation happens between two people of different perspectives, are either one of them required to act in bad faith in order to make their point? And certainly refusing to engage in discussion at all with someone who I think is good faith is an indication that you are wrong in some significant way, which is exactly how I perceive the dispute that Sam Harris has with Bret Weinstein about certain medical procedures.
The reason why I don't want to do a podcast with Bret and Heather is the same as why I wouldn't do a podcast with a 9/11 truth conspiracy theorist or Alex Jones or anyone in that world, because there's a basic asymmetry which is very hard to overcome. It's so much easier to make a mess than to clean it up. It's so much easier to light several small fires than to put them out. It's like a 10-to-1 advantage. To put it that way, it sounds like my concern is not losing a debate, and that's absolutely not my concern. If you're going to view this as a debate, it's won almost immediately. But I worry about what people take from the encounter, and I just don't want to do additional harm.
If you view it as a debate, it's won very easily, but I'm still not going to do it because I think that Bret Weinstein is acting in bad faith and he may manipulate the conversation. It's like, this sounds like excuses. This sounds like Sam not trusting that the general public can evaluate a conversation on their own merit. And obviously there are many dumb people in the world, and they're not the ones who would be listening to this conversation in the first place. But I want to go back to the issue of evaluating the character and the personality of the people involved in a conversation. Sam Harris said he wouldn't have a conversation with someone like Alex Jones or someone in that world, which I think is silly. Because a conversation with Alex Jones is the thing that reveals exactly what kind of person he is.
Do you have any significant change from that head injury?
I got hard now.
But when the kid dropped you on your head, what effect did it have on you physically?
Go ahead, Joe. Admit it.
Admit what?
You think that he's a conspiracy theorist because he got dropped on his head?
I think there's something to people that have had head trauma that become brilliant at speaking things.
And then I was like in England thousands of years ago, and I had this wife and these kids, and it was a whole lifetime like taking care of them and like growing food, and like a kid starved to death and died. And it was like, just those moments were like whole lives, dead kids, everything.
Now, I don't know if a head injury is what caused Alex Jones to be the way that he is, but certainly if you listen to that conversation, there's no shortage of reasons to believe that Alex Jones has mental illness and that explains his absurd takes rather than him being evil. He clearly believes in conspiracies, but he's not out to harm people with them. He genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing, and I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think anyone who watched that conversation thinks he's a bad person. He's just disturbed for one reason or another. And so if you are actually competent, you can have a conversation with someone who is wildly different from you, and you can get it to the point where, hey, if you think someone believes in something because they're mentally ill or because they have motivations, you should be able to elicit that through honest conversation. Let me show you a good example of how to do this and how not to do this. We'll start with how not to do this. And this is a discussion, a debate between scientists and flat earthers. Watch very carefully as the scientists, who are intelligent and presumably, hopefully, in possession of the truth, are simply unable to get to the root of the disagreement, so to speak.
So the thing of it is once you start to really take a hard look at the evidence, and you are unafraid of just standing for the truth wherever that may lead you, then people end up becoming flat earthers.
Flat, and I'm telling you, you're wrong. Okay. I have evidence that proves it's flat.
What type of evidence?
It's not a ball.
What type of evidence?
We're being misled. We're being deliberately misled by mainstream media.
What's your evidence?
We see too far. We see too far. We should not be able to see. I live in Dana Point.
Okay.
I can see San Clemente Island, which is 60 miles away.
So what? That's very high.
What do you mean, so what?
No, I'm on the beach.
1,100 feet
I'm on
tall.
the beach.
It is
what do you mean by so what?
I'm on the beach.
Yeah.
Can you see a ship which is going?
Let's talk about the ship that goes over the curvature of the Earth.
These intelligent scientists are getting upset and frustrated as they try to argue facts and logic about why the Earth isn't flat with flat earthers. And they clearly aren't getting anywhere. And you might say, well, that's evidence that we shouldn't have a scientific debate. And I would say, if you are capable of having a conversation, you can ask people what they believe and be kind and be empathetic, and they generally will tell you exactly why they believe the things they believe, even if they don't realize it themselves.
And I wanted to be an astronaut, and I wanted to be the first woman to walk the moon. Oh. So for me, I'm a glober. I went into this completely wanting it to be true. And my husband told me, he saw this thing about the fake moon landing. And I was like, you're absolutely crazy. There's no way that the moon landings are fake. And then in 2010, my husband was killed. And so I never really developed that until around 2014 when Flat Earth kind of came back up. And that little voice inside my head said, remember the fake moon landings? Remember when that was brought to my attention? And then I started really critically analyzing that. And I would say, just looking at that evidence. If they can lie about the moon landings, they can certainly lie about pictures and satellites and other things. And so I started going down that rabbit hole of studying. So that was my influence from my husband.
How many lies does it take to make a liar, right?
And being ridiculed for being inquisitive is pretty tough on us.
When people are disenfranchised by society or have unresolved trauma, then they become vulnerable to ideological possession and bad ideas like flat Earth. And if those ideas involve distrust of the scientific establishment, then the worst thing you can do is validate that distrust by lying to the public, which we clearly have seen in the past few years is possible from the medical and scientific establishment, but also compounding that distrust by saying that the science is settled and it's not worth debating and the general public shouldn't be exposed to debate because they should just trust the scientists.
Science, not to put it down, but when you're talking about rocket science, this is very difficult for the majority of people to understand, and it's designed that way. And so in a lot of ways, hiding behind rocket science is similar to religion. If you look at the Catholic Church back in the days, only we can interpret the Bible, you have to listen to what we say. So in a lot of ways, we're getting that same notion from science that says, only we can interpret what these numbers are, you just need to trust us.
Why wouldn't you debate the science?
Because the science has already been debated in the scientific system.
I understand that, but to the average person that gets confused and doesn't know whether or not you're correct or Steve Koonin is correct,
yeah, so I think
a debate would be very beneficial.
I disagree with that entirely.
So if we want to restore faith in public institutions, specifically academic and scientific institutions, maybe the people in those institutions should stop validating the stereotype of the arrogant academic who sits in their ivory tower and demands that the public trust them because they're credentialed and they don't really have to explain it or debate it. If you can't defend your ideas, then the problem isn't with the people who are trying to discredit them. The problem is with you. So, good luck, everyone, and Godspeed.